Right now, somewhere, you got an alarm set for tomorrow morning. Maybe 6, maybe 7. You'll wake up, and within about 10 minutes, you'll already be thinking about the day, emails, meetings, traffic, deadlines, something you forgot to reply to yesterday. Most of us spend 8, 9, sometimes 10 hours a day working. Then we come home tired, scroll for a bit, and do it all again tomorrow. Now here's a question that sounds simple, but honestly isn't. What did humans do before any of that existed? No jobs, no bases, no emails, no alarm clocks, no concept of Monday. For roughly 300,000 years, humans existed on this planet with absolutely none of that structure. So what filled their day? Were they just constantly starving, running from lions, and dying young? Or is that picture, the one most of us have in our heads, actually wrong? Because here's the strange part. Some anthropologists who've spent time studying the few remaining hunter-gatherer societies left on Earth today have come back with a conclusion that sounds almost backwards. In a lot of ways, ancient humans may have worked less, rested more, and had more free time than you do right now. Not because life was easy. It wasn't. But because the entire structure of a day looked completely different from ours. Today we're going to walk through an actual day in the life of an early human. Not some romanticized fantasy version, and not the miserable, nasty, brutish version either. Somewhere in between, based on real evidence. What anthropologists have learned from ancient sites, from modern hunter-gatherer groups, and from just doing the math on how much food a person actually needs to survive. By the end of this, you might start questioning whether the modern 9 to 5 is actually progress, or just a very convincing costume we've all agreed to wear. I'm G, and this is what ancient humans actually did all day. Let's start at the beginning of the day, sunrise, more or less, since that's the only alarm clock they had. There's no snooze button here. When the sun starts coming up and the light starts filtering in wherever you happen to be sleeping, a shelter, a cave, under some kind of animal hide, you wake up. Not because you have somewhere to be at 9. Just because that's when your body naturally wants to wake up, when there's no artificial light keeping you up past sunset the night before. And that's actually one of the first big differences worth pointing out. Sleep for early humans probably looked nothing like ours. Researchers who've studied a few remaining hunter-gatherer groups, communities in places like Tanzania and Namibia who still live a broadly traditional lifestyle, found something surprising. These groups don't sleep for 8 straight hours the way health experts tell us we're supposed to. A lot of them sleep in 2 chunks, with a period of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. No panic about it, no insomnia complaints. Just wake up for a bit in the dark, maybe talk quietly, maybe just lie there, then go back to sleep until it's actually light out. So the first hours of the day, before anyone's really doing anything, are slow. There's no rushing. Nobody's checking a phone. People wake up gradually, maybe someone gets a small fire going again if it died down overnight. And there's quiet conversation. This part of the day was probably one of the calmest stretches before any actual work needed to happen. Now here's where it gets interesting, because work, in the sense we think of it, didn't really start until the group had figured out what today's plan actually was. And that plan depended entirely on one thing. What does the group actually need today? If there's food left over from yesterday, maybe meat that was smoked or dried, or plants that were gathered and stored, there might be very little pressure to go find more right away. If supplies are running low, someone needs to think about foraging or hunting. But even that decision wasn't made in a panic. It was made calmly because the entire system was built around not needing huge amounts of food at once. This is actually one of the most quietly wild facts in anthropology. Researchers who've done actual time-tracking studies on hunter-gatherer societies, literally following people around with stopwatches and notebooks, recording what they did hour by hour, found that many groups only spent somewhere between 2 and 4 hours a day on actual subsistence work. Getting food. That's it. 2 to 4 hours total to keep the entire group fed for the day. Compare that to your workday. If you work 8 hours to earn money, then spend more time commuting, cooking, cleaning, and running errands, you're probably putting in 10, 11, maybe 12 hours a day just to keep your life running. Early humans, in many documented cases, needed a fraction of that just to handle their most basic need, food. And once that was done, the rest of the day was in a very real sense theirs. So let's actually walk through what that 2 to 4 hour window looked like, because finding food sounds vague, and the reality was actually pretty specific depending on whether you were part of a hunting trip or a gathering trip. Gathering, in most hunter-gatherer societies studied by anthropologists, tends to bring in the majority of daily calories, often more than hunting does, which surprises a lot of people who picture ancient humans as constantly spearing mammoths. In reality, plants, roots, nuts, berries, and small game made up the bulk of most groups' diets in most environments. Big game hunts happened, and they mattered, especially for protein and fat, but they weren't a daily occurrence. They took planning, sometimes days of tracking, and they didn't always succeed. Gathering, on the other hand, was steadier and often handled by groups working together. Sometimes all women, sometimes mixed groups, depending on the specific culture and environment. A gathering trip might mean walking a few miles from camp to a spot where a particular plant was in season, digging up tubers with a simple wooden stick, picking berries, or collecting nuts that had fallen to the ground. Here's the thing that's easy to miss. This wasn't miserable, desperate work. Modern anthropologists who've actually joined these gathering trips describe them as social. People talk. They joke. Kids come along and learn by watching and copying. It's less like a grim survival mission and more like picture a group of friends going for a long walk with a purpose, chatting the entire time, occasionally stopping to dig something up or grab a handful of berries. And crucially, gathering trips have a natural stopping point. You gather until you have enough for the day, maybe a bit extra to store, and then you're done. There's no boss telling you to gather more because the company needs to hit quarterly targets. There's no concept of more is always better. Once you have enough, you have enough. This idea that there's a natural, satisfied stopping point to daily work is something that's almost completely vanished from modern life, where the drive to accumulate more rarely has a built-in ceiling. Hunting worked differently, and it's worth spending a minute on because it says something interesting about ancient social structure. A hunting trip, especially for bigger game, often involved several men working together, sometimes with elaborate coordination, driving animals toward an ambush point, using knowledge of animal behavior built up over a lifetime, reading tracks, understanding wind direction so animals couldn't smell them coming. But here's the part that matters for today's question. Hunting trips often failed. Not occasionally, often. Anthropological studies of modern hunter-gatherers show success rates on big game hunts that are sometimes as low as 1 in 4, or even lower, depending on the animal and the season. That means hunters might go out, spend hours tracking, and come back with nothing multiple days in a row. So how did anyone survive that? This is where the social structure becomes the real technology, more important in some ways than any tool. In basically every hunter-gatherer society studied, food gets shared across the entire group, regardless of who found it. If one hunter comes back empty-handed for a week straight, he still eats because the group operates on a system where success is shared and failure is absorbed collectively. Nobody starves because their personal hunting streak went cold, the way you might struggle if you lost your paycheck for a month. This sharing wasn't some idealistic communal fantasy. Researchers think it was, in a very direct sense, a survival strategy. If you only eat what you personally catch, and hunting is unreliable, you'll starve eventually no matter how skilled you are. But if the whole group shares everything, the group's overall food supply becomes far more stable, because someone is usually successful even when you're not. It's basically an ancient insurance system, except instead of paying premiums, you pay into it by sharing your own catch on the days you succeed. By late morning or early afternoon, in most cases, the actual food-related work for the day was done. Which brings us to the part of ancient daily life that gets almost no attention, but might be the most surprising part of this entire story. So if the actual job of finding food takes 2 to 4 hours, what happens with the rest of daylight? This is where the modern assumption really breaks down. A lot of us picture ancient humans in a constant state of grinding survival. Every waking hour spent fighting to stay alive. But the anthropological record, both from archaeological evidence and from studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, paints a very different picture. The afternoon, for most of the group, most days, was unstructured time. What did people actually do with it? A whole lot, it turns out. Tool-making took up a significant chunk of time, and it wasn't rushed, panicked work. It was often careful, even meditative. Shaping a stone tool properly, napping flint into a useful blade, took skill and patience. Older, experienced members of the group would often spend afternoons slowly working on tools, sometimes while younger members watched and learned by imitation. Since there was no formal school, no classroom, just watching someone who was good at something and copying them over and over until you got good too. Childcare filled a lot of the day as well, but again, probably not in the stressed, scheduled way modern parents experience it. Anthropologists studying groups like the Hadza in Tanzania or the Jew/hoansi in the Kalahari Desert describe a childcare style that's remarkably relaxed by modern standards. Kids roam. They play with other kids of mixed ages. Adults keep a loose eye on things collectively. It's not one parent solely responsible for one child's every move. It's the entire camp watching over all the kids together. Anthropologists sometimes call this alloparenting, parenting shared across a whole community rather than isolated within a single household. Then there's rest. Actual, guilt-free rest. Napping in the shade during the hottest part of the day was common in a lot of environments, especially in hot climates like parts of Africa where early humans evolved. There was no cultural pressure telling people that resting during daylight made you lazy or unproductive. If your body was tired and the food situation for the day was handled, you rested. Simple as that. Social time filled a massive amount of the day too, and this part deserves real attention because it might be the single biggest difference between ancient daily life and ours. Sitting around, talking, telling stories, arguing playfully, teasing each other, gossiping about who did what. These weren't distractions from real work. In a very real sense, they were the work. Maintaining relationships, sharing information about where food or water might be, passing down stories and knowledge to younger group members, resolving small conflicts before they became big ones. All of this happened through hours of unstructured social time that modern life mostly squeezes into brief moments between other obligations. Anthropologists who've spent extended time with the Hadza have noted that adults in these communities can easily spend several hours a day simply sitting together, talking, doing small tasks like fixing tools or preparing food, while chatting, essentially existing in each other's company, without any specific agenda. Compare that to how much uninterrupted, agenda-free social time most people get in a typical modern week. For a lot of people, it's practically zero. Maybe a weekend dinner with friends, squeezed between everything else. And then there's play. Actual play. For adults, not just kids. Music in particular shows up constantly in the archaeological and anthropological record. Flutes carved from bone dating back tens of thousands of years. Evidence of singing and rhythmic clapping in almost every documented traditional society. Storytelling around a fire wasn't just entertainment. Either it was how history got passed down, how lessons about danger or cooperation got taught without a single word of writing, how the group's shared identity got reinforced night after night, generation after generation. Grooming, literally picking through each other's hair, checking for parasites, that kind of thing, also took up real time and served a double purpose. It's practical, sure, keeping people cleaner and healthier. But researchers studying both primates and human hunter-gatherer societies think it also functioned as a bonding activity, not unlike a spa day, except instead of paying for it, you did it for each other for free, constantly, as a normal part of daily life. So when you add it all up, the tool-making, the childcare, the resting, the socializing, the music, the storytelling, the grooming, you start to see that free time wasn't some rare luxury for ancient humans. It was the default state of most of the day once the food situation was handled. As the day cooled down and the sun started dropping, the whole camp's energy would shift. This is probably the part of ancient daily life that feels most different from anything in modern experience, because so much of modern evening time is spent isolated, in front of a screen, alone in a room, scrolling. Fire changed everything for early humans, and not just because it cooked food or kept predators away. Fire created a shared, glowing center of gravity for the entire group every single night. Once it got dark, and there was no other light source competing for attention, everyone naturally gathered around that fire. This is where a huge amount of cultural transmission happened, where stories got told, where the group's shared history and values got reinforced, where kids absorbed lessons about the world by listening to adults talk, argue, joke, and occasionally get into serious debates about important decisions facing the group. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner did research specifically on this, comparing daytime conversation among the Jew/hoansi to nighttime conversation around the fire, and found something genuinely fascinating. Daytime talk tended to be practical. Logistics, complaints, coordination. Nighttime talk around the fire, though, shifted dramatically towards storytelling, myth, humor, and social bonding. The darkness and the fire together seemed to create a completely different kind of conversation than daylight ever did. Think about what that means. Every single night, for hundreds of thousands of years, humans had this built-in ritual, a fire, a group, and hours of storytelling and connection, with nothing else competing for attention. No phones lighting up. No separate rooms people retreated to. Just one shared source of light and warmth, pulling everyone into the same physical and social space. Every night for their entire lives. Dinner, in a lot of these communities, was also a shared, communal event rather than something eaten alone or in rush shifts. Food that had been hunted or gathered during the day would get cooked over the fire and distributed among everyone present, again reinforcing that sharing culture we talked about earlier. Eating wasn't just fuel. It was one more excuse for the whole group to be together at the same time, doing the same thing. As the night went on and people got tired, they'd drift off to sleep, sometimes in family groups, sometimes with looser arrangements depending on the culture, but almost always with other people nearby. Sleeping completely alone, in total isolation, the way a huge number of people in modern cities do every single night, would have been almost unthinkable in most ancient human contexts. You slept surrounded by your group, which meant a level of physical and social safety that a lot of modern people, frankly, don't have. Now, before this starts sounding like some kind of idyllic paradise we all foolishly gave up, it's worth being honest about the parts of ancient daily life that were genuinely hard. Because romanticizing this too much does a disservice to the real complexity of what these lives actually involved. Life expectancy at birth for early humans was low, sometimes estimated around 30 to 35 years on average. But that number is misleading if you don't dig into it a bit. A huge chunk of that low average comes from extremely high infant and child mortality. Losing children young pulled the overall average way down. If you actually survived childhood, your chances of living into your 60s or even 70s were meaningfully better than that scary average number suggests. Skeletal evidence has repeatedly shown older individuals in ancient populations, people who clearly lived long enough to develop arthritis, to lose most of their teeth, to show the kind of wear that only comes with decades of life. Danger was real too. Predators existed. Disease existed, even without modern understanding of germs. Injuries that would be minor today, a broken bone, an infected cut, could be genuinely life-threatening without modern medical care. Food shortages happened, sometimes severe ones, especially during droughts or harsh seasons, and when they did, the whole group suffered together. Violence between groups happened as well. Anthropological and archaeological evidence suggests conflict between different bands did occur, sometimes over territory or resources, and it could be brutal. This wasn't some universally peaceful utopia where humans never hurt each other. It was a real, complicated existence, with real dangers that modern comfort has mostly eliminated from daily life. So the honest picture here isn't ancient life was better in some simple, complete sense. It's more specific than that. The daily structure, the actual hour-by-hour experience of a normal, non-crisis day, often involved less forced labor, more rest, and more built-in social connection than most modern lives do. But the margin for disaster was much thinner. A bad season, a serious injury, a disease outbreak. Any of these could turn a relatively comfortable existence into a genuine crisis, in ways modern infrastructure mostly protects us from now. It's less ancient life was paradise, and more the trade-off looked completely different. Modern life offers incredible physical safety and medical protection, in exchange for a daily structure that often feels relentless, isolated, and short on the kind of unstructured social time that used to be the default, not the exception. So, why does any of this actually matter today, beyond just being an interesting historical fact? Because your brain, the actual physical wiring inside your skull, evolved for that ancient daily rhythm, not the one you're currently living. Evolution doesn't move fast. The structure of human daily life changed dramatically with the rise of agriculture roughly 10,000 years ago, and even more dramatically with industrialization a couple hundred years ago. In evolutionary terms, that's basically no time at all. Your brain is still, in a very real sense, expecting the kind of day we just walked through. Mixed physical activity, several hours of unstructured social time, communal meals, and a clear boundary between getting resources and everything else. This might explain a few things that feel oddly familiar. Why does sitting at a desk for 8 straight hours feel so exhausting, even though you're barely moving? Because your body evolved for a mix of walking, digging, carrying, and physical activity spread throughout a flexible day, not prolonged, motionless focus in one spot. Why does modern loneliness feel so specifically painful, even in a world more connected than ever through phones and social media? Because your brain evolved expecting hours of actual in-person social contact every single day, not brief digital interactions scattered between other obligations. Why do so many people report feeling better after time in nature, after a hike, after sitting around an actual fire with friends, even if they can't quite explain why? Because those experiences are, in a strange way, closer to the environment your brain actually expects than a fluorescent-lit office ever will be. None of this means modern life is a mistake, or that we should all abandon civilization and go live in the woods. Modern medicine alone has saved an almost unimaginable number of lives compared to ancient mortality rates. But understanding this ancient daily rhythm gives you a kind of diagnostic tool for figuring out why certain parts of modern life feel so specifically draining, even when on paper everything should be fine. You have food security, shelter, safety, all the basics ancient humans constantly had to work for, and yet plenty of people still feel exhausted, isolated, and vaguely unwell. Understanding what your brain actually evolved to expect might be part of the explanation. So, what did ancient humans actually do all day with no jobs? They worked, but for a fraction of the hours most of us do now. They rested, without guilt whenever their bodies needed it. They spent enormous stretches of time with other people, talking, teasing, teaching, telling stories, making music, not as a reward for finishing work, but as a core, expected part of an ordinary day. And every single night, they gathered around a fire, together, with nothing else competing for their attention. It wasn't paradise. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and often genuinely hard in ways modern comfort has mostly erased from our daily experience. But the actual rhythm of an ordinary day, the balance between effort and rest, between solitude and connection, might have been healthier in some very specific ways than the rhythm most of us are currently living. I want to hear from you on this one. If you could trade your current daily schedule for a day exactly like the one we just walked through, no job, no phone, just food finding, tool making, resting, and a fire at night with your whole community, would you actually take that trade? Or is there something about modern life you genuinely wouldn't give up? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if this kind of deep dive into what your ancient brain is actually built for is something you're into, go ahead and subscribe. We're going to keep digging into the parts of your own biology and history that are still shaping your life today, whether you realize it or not. I'm G, and I'll see you in the next one.